Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very timely discussion as we are going to focus on the 2019-2020 audit report from the Auditor General's office. The Auditor General himself presented it just yesterday to a joint committee in Parliament. This discussion is also going to focus on, amongst other things, concerns from the report. We're going to look at recurring issues. We're also going to look at prosecution of the crime, all in a bid to promote value for money when it comes to government expenditure and public accountability. We are honored to have with us on the show Mr. Obadiah Biraro, who is the Auditor General, Office of the Auditor General. Mr. Obadiah, great to have you on The Square.
Thank you.
My name is Denham Pisi, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by The Square resident panelists. I'll kick off with Berna Namata, looking pretty in pink. Great to have you on the show, Berna.
Thank you, Dan.
Also resident panelist of The Square, Charles Herber. Always a pleasure to have you.
Same here, Dana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Like we do before, we kick off, we have midweek highlights that we'd like to share with the viewers and our guests. Just midweek highlights from the resident panelists, the Square resident panelists. Charles, I would like to start with you. Is there anything you'd like to share in the middle of the week that has caught your attention?
As usual, anything around COVID, and
Yes.
I'm particularly pleased around mice and COVID. And I'll talk about sports tourism and COVID. We've just completed a very successful Tour du Rwanda. BAL is coming on, which are two very big tournaments. When we draw the curtains on BAL, we'll have the annual Kwibuka women's cricket tournament, which is a very big thing as far as the African cricket space is concerned. And this particular one is very special because we have countries that have never been to Rwanda before, like Namibia, Botswana, and what have you. But it just taking it away from the specifics of the sports and relating it to mice and COVID, it's fulfilling. We've lost Chogam, but there's a lot more happening.
In the sports sector?
No. In the events sector, generally speaking.
Yes.
So isn't this sort of a wake-up call for us that we don't need to look much further afield in terms of waking up our economic sector when it comes to COVID and the aftermath of COVID? Definitely, yes.
I agree with you. Berna, any midweek highlights you'd like to share?
Yes, today we had the budget discussion. I think we could do with more transparency from the Ministry of Finance because budget consultations begin earlier, and we shouldn't be waiting to hear the budget read in Parliament. It would be more useful if there's more engagement around the budget process. Yeah,
I agree. Thank you for your midweek highlights. I would like us to just read a couple of tweets before I address the first question to the Auditor General. A couple of tweets based coming from our viewers based on the show tonight. The first tweet we have is from Delphine, who says that for the Office of the Auditor General audit recommendations not to be implemented, does it mean that the audit clients are reluctant to implement them? Why can't there be administrative sanctions for those who fail to implement them as part of their KPIs? It might work. So, Mr. Obadiah, you can see these are comments from the general public questioning the lack of implementation of the recommendations from the report. We also have a tweet coming in says, I do not miss discussion indeed. We welcome the 2019-20 OAG Rwanda audit report as a sustained arm for public accountability and PFM public finance mechanism in Rwanda. We also have another tweet coming in just to kickstart this conversation. If you could have that on our screens. This tweet is from Auditor, who says, I basically thank this great man, Auditor General, for his kind commitment to help our country to be a nation with resilient budget by pointing out misusers and embezzlers at large. You're a real auditor. We have another tweet coming in from Frank Chidienza, and this tweet says, let's not celebrate just yet. The decrease in embezzled public funds this fiscal year could be a result of the reduced economic activity due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He says there is less cash flow available to be swindled by unpatriotic individuals. Very succinct with his words. We also have another tweet coming in, still from Frank, and he says, says the Auditor General should be given legislative powers, if this is not the case already, to investigate and forward details of suspected offenders to the prosecution for legal action. Serious problems require serious actions if we are serious about resolving them. So those are the tweets. We'll be having more of these later on, so please keep your comments coming, from the public. But we will kick off with the first part of this discussion, which echoes what some of you have said. So to Mr. Obadiah, this year, I want us to just quickly, touch on recurring issues. The government lost slightly over 5.6 billion Rwandan francs in government expenditure, as highlighted in your report that you just presented yesterday. As it has been in the last 3 to 4 years, the 2019-2020 reports includes recurring issues such as inadequate management review, controls over financial information, the usual issues such as cases of delayed and abandoned contracts, continuing cases of idle assets, stalled projects, as well as non-transparent tender awards. So if you could just give us a brief overview, Mr. Auditor General, a brief overview as to why some of these issues are recurring, and then if you could also move on to the second part of the question, just to give us, in layman's terms, what is the impact on Rwandan citizens when it comes to public service delivery based on some of these recurrent issues, for instance, in the health and education sectors. But first, if you could start by just giving us a brief overview of these recurring issues and why they keep on happening, especially from this 2019-2020 audit report. Over to you, Mr. Obadiah.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on a day after we presented to the Parliament as required by Article 166 of the Constitution, where it is required that the Auditor General will report to Parliament on a date, appropriate date preceding the process of budget review by the Parliament and eventually passing it out for government expenditure. Yeah. So we did that exactly as required by the law, and the highlights are what you have been seeing in the press. You journalists have kept me busy. For the last, the whole day today. There are some friends of Namata who came from the East African asking questions which are as broad as the East African newspaper itself. I was looking at Namata's, handwriting, but I answered them. And they are interesting anyway. So, when you people say, keep on reoccurring, the office, some of the national audit offices, supreme audit institutions in the world are more than 200 years old, and they are still auditing. So the more there is activity, the more you are likely to get the happenings that are written in the Constitution, Article 166, subsection 1, that please just do what is prioritized. Do you have the capability to understand priority year by year? Might that escape due to some reasons? Do you know we have Corona now for how many? Is it coming to 1.5 years? Are you sure you get priorities during the Corona pandemic? Don't you have some fishermen and women in the troubled waters? And then that's where there comes the subsection 2 of that article, that please have enough integrity to do enough due diligence, that you may not be careless, that may end up into wasteful expenditure. The moment you slide into that wastefulness, it is taking you to another dangerous scenario where you may have, you start embezzlement. So, therefore, for us, when we see those signals, we sense danger and we report accordingly. More so when our people who are accounting officers involved in the whole full cycle of public finance management were guided by the law. That constitution is there, but the enabling law, which is the loi organique de budget, but people who know enough English like Haba are now beginning to baptize it in a friendly way, that Public Finance Management Act. So it guides those who handle government money. But all the same, you find some circumvention here and there. So reasons are various, but for us, we don't take reasons. We are just one substance over form, but the form should guide the substance. So then we say, how come you have unsupported expenditure? Sincerely, that should not happen. Some people do have partially supported. It is not possible. Partially is even worse than unsupported. Okay? Then we have outright wasteful, as if it is not written in the Constitution. Wasteful. Wastefulness, you journalists, you may say, but this is very subjective. But by the time we discuss it, we discover it, we discuss it, and we write it up to Parliament, sincerely, that is a red line enough that anybody should be held accountable. Then we have unauthorized. These are very, very important words in the accountability cycle, unauthorized. Why can't we define? Why should a person sit in the government accountability position and cannot define authority? And therefore, you have those millions, over 300 million. But the good news is that the fraudulently utilized funds have really reduced significantly from over 400 million to less than 60 million. So that people are beginning to. Then some of the questions I saw in your overview here are so much alluding to value for money. And it is in keeping, it's as if you read our report, because much of it is many pages are spent on value for money. Value for money comes from this, I know, I hope your camera can catch it. When you read this page here, this cover, you have finished the whole modus operandi as to what we do and why. Okay? Whereby you have featured education here in one paragraph. These are your kids. Koranabuhanga. We have a whole section devoted to that. Then you have what you people eat and export, the horticulture, irrigation. Then you have energy that we are using right now, and the industries at that economic zone. Then you have the water, which is the SDG number. I know Haba has forgotten. It's SDG number 6. Then you have your Sante. There is no other time people should be interested in Sante than today. That microphone. No, not microphone, but microscope. Microscope. 24 hours, you get results for COVID test. Rapid, Then you have over here, which is not so vivid, but this is milk processing zone. I read somewhere that Rwanda should be exporting cheese, especially that organic. So, then you have your famous, roads, RTD. So this is the whole economy. Then you have something which is not, very visible because of the color separation. That all this we do in public interest. And then, if you have done all that, how does it make or making a difference in lives of citizens? That is International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, Principle 12. That's where we spend our life. Yeah. So, you saw Parliament debating, scrutinizing a value for money audit, especially on CPCs. Do you know CPCs?
No.
Community processing centers. People like Haba will know that in the Eastern Tigers actually came from CPCs. Community processing, agro-based, which are agro-based. And yet, that's where our life is. In agriculture, crop, and animal husbandry. So the government has a policy, originated a policy of turning all that into goods, value addition, locally here, and then you can export the banana wine. Why not? If people export Dodoma wine, that grape was grown there by a German that produces Dodoma wine. Why can't you export wine from Ibitoki, bananas from Duamagan? But we have not done well in that. 4.4 billion, 113 million is actually at risk in 6 districts. So, when you focus on 5.7, journalists, I think, let me not be charged of, is it a defamation or what? I think you have developed resilience for too long a time. This report contains much more than 5.7. If you read all these pages, and they are well demarcated, well written, so there is more to it than 5.7. Because in the CPCs, for example, you have very humble 4 billion and 113 million, but which could cause a lot of accelerated multiplier effect in the countryside, 6 districts, all the way from Burera, Nyabihu, potatoes. Sincerely, have you ever, you go to the supermarket tomorrow and you see those chips, you know, kids enjoy, but they could be made here in Rwanda, Nyabihu, you know? So, there is more to it than this 5.7 billion, which the journalists all over. You know, I addressed about 10 media houses today, including RBA, and 5.7. You know, why can't we talk of more of what the 190 should strive on? So that is the whole content of this report, and you will have time to go through it. The Parliament is going to now hand it over to the scrutiny. You will see a lot of sparks on the TV in the coming May, later part of May, and then in June. But this is a good report, not that I blowing my own trumpet, but no matter if it doesn't blow it, then why not me?
Thank you very much, Mr. Over there. I really like, because you know, you were on the show here in 2018 when we were talking about the 2017-2018 audit report, and we were kind of talking about the same issues. You know, year in, year out, fail of institutions to implement your recommendations. Does your office need more teeth? And we'll get to that later. I just want to hear from the resident panelists based on what they also have to share. But thank you also very much for giving us a brief. I think what the public needs to know is this report, this is what it entails. This is how the public is affected, and you just give a very apt description in terms of, the agro sector. This wasteful expenditure, there's a ripple effect. It's not just the number you mentioned. Those are the numbers from, from the institutions, but in terms of monetary terms, on communities, on the economy, in terms of different sectors, it's bigger than that. I'd like to hear from my resident panelist, Charles. Kick off with you.
First of all, I think we're making progress. And let's give credit where it's due, because even when you look at the report, they say there is a reduced wastage in terms of losses in government expenditure.
But just very quickly, like Frank Chijente said, that might just be due to the COVID pandemic, but yeah, carry on.
No, but also, so that's one thing, and I want to go into the semantics or the arithmetic, not the semantics, but the arithmetic of the progress. I want to talk about progress from a point of view of taking the Auditor General's recommendations serious. I think the progress is predominantly because his recommendations and whatever happens, whatever repercussions people have, and maybe Obadiah does not know this, but with the exception of Bana, neither you nor I are journalists. So he kept referring to us as journalists.
But Barna is a journalist.
Yeah, no, I said with the exception of Bana.
Yes, Barna, yes.
Yes, with the exception of Bana, neither Diana, for information, Obadiah, neither Diana nor myself are journalists. So we tend to sit here every Wednesday and form some sort of opinion. So that opinion is based on facts, feedback, and things that we collect from left, right, and center. Where am I going with this conversation? That the Auditor General's office has done a fabulous job in terms of creating awareness and putting people on their toes. For example, for me in my business, in my day-to-day business, if I walk into a public servant's office, they'll be cautious about the Auditor General saying that we flouted tender procedures, or we are not doing things in the right way, or we're not giving you value for money, because the Auditor General will come to fault us on this. Now, over time, what we are realizing is that they are more cautious about the Auditor General than necessarily being a little bit better at what they are doing. But baby steps. That's the first bit. The second bit is that, and I think the Auditor General needs to continue biting because, let me rephrase, the Auditor General needs to continue barking because until he continuously barks, will he bite? And this doesn't matter whether tomorrow there's a female in the office, but it's in reference to the office. We are beginning to realize that people fear to make the wrong decisions. And that is a step in the right direction. Now, to be a little bit more specific, and Bwana Obadiah did mention about wasteful expenditure and value for money audits. Some of these things you realize that they directly bite government business enterprises. Businesses or parastatals which have either been set up as special purpose vehicles for delivering specific projects, whether it's goods or services, or by default or by design, they are supposed to be making money. Take an example of where we are right now, Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, or RSSB, or RURA, or REG, and the others that bring in money. So, thank you. The fact that these government business enterprises have developed a business approach, by and large, is predominantly because of the stick that they expect to get from the Auditor General's office. And I want to hold my thought there and say, I think we're in the right direction. I will, as the show progresses, hold my reservations in terms of especially what those government business enterprises can do better, but I want to sort of give credit where it's due. Yes.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Obadiah in terms of, are we really making progress? Are these GBEs, or these agencies or government institutions actually making progress because, of the awareness, the sensitization, the year in, year out recommendations? I have a sort of slightly alternative view, but yeah, Charles, valid points. But before we go to you, Mr. Obadiah, I'd like to just hear from Bernard Namata as well.
The Auditor General has just put us on the spot, so I had better well represent the journalists.
Yes.
Yeah, and yes, my job or credibility, media, we depend a lot on credibility. Yeah, so it's a huge document, and I'm glad that he brought it and he's showing people, so it's a huge document, but it's interesting. I've tried to go through it, but you need time to really read it and understand what the message. Now, when I looked at the outline, for me, at this point, I was interested in revenue collection and the audit of Rwanda revenue. Specifically because with the pandemic, we are faced with the challenge of domestic resource mobilization now. And that covers, I think it's from page 36 of the Auditor General's report. That is Rwanda revenue. And if you read what the indictment is of Rwanda revenue, I don't know. I mean, it's a problem. One, overstating their results. Secondly, you have an ineffective database of taxpayers. You have delays in returns, in payments, and this is an issue I think, Charles, we've talked about. And this is Rwanda Revenue Authority. Right now, like I said, today we have the budget. I think if my memory serves me right, we are saying that only 16% will be donor funded of the current budget in June. And then you look at the chapter at Rwanda Revenue and you wonder where that money will come from. So we have serious issues there. And I think, well, he's done his job in terms of showing us where the problems are. But that chapter is painful. The other thing that comes before Rwanda Revenue is the revelation that delay in paying invoices.
To suppliers.
Yes.
I read that too, and it's
and
quite
that
yes.
goes as long as 10 years. So on one hand, you want to promote business. And on the other hand, you're limiting their potential to, to work. So I think we need to take it seriously. It may look like an event, he presents these reports and people show up in parliament and then they ask for forgiveness. But I think the pandemic has changed the luxury of looking at resources and saying, you can get away with this. So I hope that one, parliament will do its job and the other agencies enforce. Yeah, because the other issue that his report talks about is lack of coordination, which also affects the follow-up in terms of, yes, with the recommendations.
Yeah. Lots of, I also, tried to go through the reports last night, at least most of the executive summary. It's an easy read, which is good. It's an easy read, it's not very technical. It's really direct and it's not that dense. And the facts are really put forward. But just looking at it, I was thinking, if this is my home, and I had, people I've entrusted to take care of my home, and there's just finances left, right, and center, bleeding here, bleeding there, very integral to making my home, habitable. I feel like this is what's happening in terms of government and government expenditure. And like I said early on, we had this conversation with Mr. Obadiah in 2018. We're having it again here in 2021. And the question is, what I want us to go to is now looking at what next? And Brian, I like the way you said it's almost like an event. He presents it to Parliament. There's a media buzz around it. Public Accounts Committee summons ministers or summons people. They meet, and then towards the end of the year, it's the same story again, waiting for the end of the fiscal year before the Auditor General can release his, ensuing report. So back to you, Mr. Obadiah. Before we just go to the second part of the conversation, in terms of, what a lot of people are asking, can you have prosecutorial sort of powers? But before we go to that, I'd just like you to respond, if possible, to what Charles has said and what Bernard has said following your first points. Over to you, Mr. Obadiah.
I think the status quo as it stands now is fine. I wish it would work. You see, in 1904, I don't know who was there by then, except me. There was a very huge case in the UK, and a mathematician judge by the name Lord Denning, he actually separated these powers that you see today. The Office of the Auditor General worldwide. The powers must be separated. That he said in his own words that the Auditor General is not blood-hound. Blood-hound is a dog. You can take in your English. But he's a watchdog. He shall not certify what he has no reason to believe is true. But should his suspicion be aroused, he will probe that to the root. The case was there. And in 1904 to date, that principle becomes very vivid, very appropriate, day in, day out. So we do not have the Office of the Auditor General. The Auditor General does not have to have prosecutorial or whatever. Let there be a prosecutor. The fact you add the word general, prosecutor general. And the Auditor General, if he has done enough of his work, the rest should be. For example, where do we find in our laws effectiveness of administrative law? All of you seated there, you are experts in your own right in the corporate governance, particularly Charles. Corporate governance is about fundamentals of good internal control. You don't find a court of law the court of law comes in as exceptional. So it is about the controls. And then Charles gave me some leeway as to what to say here. The 16 institutions that are given the powers, because you people like powers, the powers to manage close to $2 billion in the interest of wananchi. Producing goods and services. 16 institutions, including 6 government enterprises. If effort would be put there in terms of corporate governance, I tell you a lot would change, you would see it vividly. Now, you find some of them are very fast in going to Parliament to look for baptism. Baptism how? Calling themselves a company. And sincerely, they add on those fancy words like limited. But they disregard the shareholder. 100% owned by government. And he does his things disregarding the shareholder. So, and once you subject yourself to the word limited, it means you are a company. But are you behaving as a company? So, if those 16 institutions can be concentrated on by the journalist Namata and the rest of her clansmates, I can assure you they can help us to change all this. You don't have to be a prosecutor general to change this, but you have to tell RURA, as a board of RURA, that please, where are your financial statements? When you look at 3 years, 4 years in fact, up to 2020, RURA had never been audited. So where are the shareholders of RURA? Until the Auditor General had to go there and ban the midnight candles. Okay? So where are the shareholders? Where is the board? To whom does RURA report? Okay, fine. Even if they report, in what language? What language do they talk? Shareholders and management. What language do they talk? Since time immemorial, I have told you that case is where the shareholders actually missed the dividend because the accountant, the CFO, had overstated, actually understated, they overstated the gross profit. And the bottom line, there is profit here, but there is no money in the bank. And the shareholders are lining up there to receive checks, dividend. So government, supposing government has to stand on the doorway of these companies, WASAC. Do you know WASAC can make profit? I can give you numbers here. But 37 of that water which is flowing around here is never billed to anyone. And that is approximately 6.3 billion. If you get 6.3 billion, offset the net loss we are talking about today, I can assure you, a government company makes profit. But corporate governance is a problem, much bigger problem than 5.6 billion. Then you go to another category of boards. A board is a multiplicity of subunits that were formed to deliver, convert government policy in a particular sector, education. You have mentioned it here in the outline. You want to have that freedom to work like a body corporate and produce the books. But I wish you could read this report. What happened to the books by REM? And then I wish you could read this report and you find what happened to the Mutuelle de Santé. We audit the 26 government hospitals, district hospitals, in addition to. But how much, there is good policies indeed in that health sector. The insurance companies are supposed to be ensuring the business of those hospitals, the patient and so on. But you'll find 4.7 billion, I think. Much of it, the insurance companies who work with the hospitals and then the Mutuelle de Santé, the bills have been rejected. How will the hospital function? Of late, you will find there has been created. There has been some campaign for over 10 years. Some by so well-meaning citizens of this country that there should be Rwanda medical supplies, and they are limited. Namata will help us to find out the meaning of limited. Okay? Therefore, it's going to help to manage the government district pharmacies. Some sanity will come. But it is taking off from MPPD. there is a lot to do. So, those boards by whatever name called, those government enterprises by whatever name called. Today I was telling journalists that when you have the word enterprise, since the economist of Adam Smith, Rod Keynes, and others of today, maybe by now we can add the name Wahab as an economist of 21st century. But they will tell you that once you have the name enterprise, it simply means profit. And then the economist will go in the academic whatever discourse of the meaning of profit, the definition of profit. Government requires financial profit. Government requires social profit. Government requires economic profit, all of that. Therefore, in these 10, 16 institutions, if corporate governance principles can simply be concentrated on, then there is the supervision, that superstructure of supervision, a sector supervisor. How is it doing? So, and unfortunately, whether we want or not, I can assure you everything government has become corporate governance.
Mr.
You know, government borrows.
Yes.
Yes.
And the government will pay, whether you borrow locally here, whether you borrow abroad, whether, it is corporate governance. The human being, human capital, they never make mistake, joke around it. Who is the CFO? Do you know a CFO is a de facto deputy CEO? Who is he in this? So, around these institutions, whether a company or a board or whatever, please let all of you concentrate on it in your own way of influence, and things will change tremendously.
Thank you very much. So I think, basically what you're saying, what people ask, does the Office of the Auditor General need to be given, legislative powers to prosecute or to follow up on prosecution? I think what you're saying really solidly is the issue lies in corporate governance. It lies in the boards that run these institutions, and corporate governance is really something that's seriously lacking, and the lack of it therefore leads to these institutions and wasteful expenditure, amongst other things. Just very quickly before we go back to our social media feed, I'd like to hear from our resident panelists, but as briefly as possible.
If I may go first, I don't think there's huge appetite from the government in terms of implementing in terms of putting in place the implementations of the Auditor General. If there was the Auditor General's recommendations, if there was, because much as it may sound alarmist in nature, but Obadiah is a mwalimu by training, he explains it in very, very simplistic terms. If a company has been set up by government, and it has been set up as a limited liability company, it must run as a limited liability company, just like an MG or Blue Oceans or Century Real Estate for that matter. So there's a huge gap in what we want to do and what we actually do. And we can give a few examples, like when the government of Rwanda woke up in the morning and said they wanted MICE tourism to succeed, they put in money in the Rwanda Cycling Federation. They built the arena. They put money into PSG and Arsenal and so forth. You put your money where your mouth is, and you're very deliberate because you wanted these results. But I think it's Bana who alluded to this, that the Auditor General's report is just a box that we are going to tick. We have an Auditor General's office. He produces a very alarming report, and we ensure after Evelyn Kamagaju there will be an equally sharp-biting person like Obadiah, and after Obadiah there will be an equally eloquent person like that, and then you'll say, no, don't blame us for other things, but we have an Auditor General that speaks, period. So where I'm going with this conversation is I think government needs to take the recommendations of the Auditor General's office a lot more serious. Now, my second point is really around the corporate governance and...
It is just not by the way. It is Article 69 of Law number, I think 79 of 13th September 2013. So a parliament cannot have gone legislating that for it to be a by the way.
Well, if we were to talk about unconstitutional things that are being done, I think it might require a whole square. But I'm sure the point that you're raising, Bwana Auditor General, is that in as far as government is acting in terms of not considering your recommendations seriously, you are insinuating that government is acting unconstitutionally.
No.
Yes.
Constitution it guarantees
yes.
the making orders, the making of the enabling law. It is you people who operate this law that actually are at fault. Yeah, individually. That is I don't know who is the lawyer here, but you have committed, I told the journalists today, that you have committed an offense called misfeasancy, which is a breach of trust. A breach of trust, the trust is founded in fiduciary duty, the duty of trust. Therefore, when you don't implement the Auditor General's recommendations, you have committed an offense called misfeasancy. First and foremost, the punishment is administrative before you go to the law. So,
yeah. I think, but just very quickly, you know, this goes back to the earlier question that I said just before you hear from Brian and go to a social media feed. In terms of, I know for a fact that, you know, the Prosecution General's Office, the National Public Prosecution Authority, since the report, some of the reports that have been released, they have followed up on some of these issues. I think the issue is that the numbers of cases, you know, individuals or people heading institutions that have been taken to court, they don't tally up with the billions that are still, you know, in irregular or wasteful expenditure. But I know for a fact our prosecution follows up on some of the issues raised in Auditor General's reports over the years to try and, Charles, to answer your question.
Yes.
I don't know if it's selectively, but I know for a fact they do try and
absolutely, and yes, I think we're both right. They do try, but they do try selectively. I think the second point that I wanted to raise is that if you look at the composition of the boards and where there is merit and there is no merit, and to Obadiah's point around governance and corporate governance,
yes.
It's not unheard of for a Director General to wake up in the morning and say, Diana Bana, are you happy to serve on my board? So the quality of the boards, especially in government business enterprises, is something that the Auditor General has picked on, year in, year out. To my earlier point, that if government is extremely interested,
they would select the board members better.
Purely on merit, they should be. Yes.
I guess some of the, you know, we are kind of narrowing it down to why do these institutional issues keep on happening?
Yes.
Why is there recurring issues? And Auditor General has said, largely this is in part of corporate governance. It's largely in part to the boards that are board members appointed by certain authorities. So maybe we should start looking.
In the business world.
We should start looking.
And we alluded to this in the show last week.
I want to hear from Bernard.
No, just let me finish that point. Yeah. In the show last week, we alluded to this, that in the business world, management is held entirely responsible by the board.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't the same be applicable amongst government business enterprises?
Brenna, over to you.
Yes.
I think the issue of so it appears everybody thinks that courts are the way forward around mismanagement or wasteful expenditure.
I think Obadiah said it's not the only solution.
Yeah, and if you ask me, I feel that perhaps the beginning point should be the skills audit. Do we have the right people in the right places? I think that's the fundamental question, and I don't know whether his scope allows him to do a skills audit. Perhaps if we started with a skills audit, then we would know exactly, because part of the responses sometimes is, I didn't know that this is the wrong thing.
So some of these people are mainly incompetent?
Yes, there's incompetence. And the other thing is, if you look at again at the report, there's this particular interesting case around government officials who are fired or leave the jobs before 5 years, and they've taken out cars, and they are unable to refund.
To pay back the loans.
Yes,
for yes.
To pay back. Can you imagine that? Should we still be giving people cars when they're appointed, or you have to find another scheme? Yeah. So anyway, my point is, one, the beginning point has to be a skills audit. Have the right people in the right places. Regarding the corporate governance, we still have a big problem, like he rightly pointed out, because people wake up and call their friends and say, you know, are you happy to come to my board? And that is how people end up on boards, without bringing any value to the board. The other issue is, again, because of corporate governance issues. I have a friend who was competing for a board position, and on the panel there was a CEO of this, you know. So if the CEO is interviewing,
I think I get this.
You know, a CEO is part of the panel that is interviewing board members. Yeah. What do you expect when the when the
so
job
very
is
quickly,
given?
skills audits. Let's go back to the top. Charles, very interesting point. That appointing authorities who appoint these board members, and there's a ripple effect. You put board members who are not handling these institutions later on, there's just a domino effect in the institution's wasteful expenditure of government monies. We've come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, we only have 1 hour to discuss these things. I would like to hear closing remarks from you, Auditor General, as briefly as possible. What would you like the public to know? What are your closing remarks in terms of your strong message based on your report and on behalf of your institution, if you're to really deliberately try and curb wasteful, irregular, and that sort of thing when it comes to government's expenditure? Over to you, Mr. Biraro.
Yeah, my closing remarks are those recommended. You find our report this year around is full of value for money audit. And as our sister there, Namata, said, there must be the competence to understand the value for money that is expected out of my position as the CEO of these 16 institutions. The value for money, but the government expects financial profit, economic profit, social profit.
Either or.
No, all of them.
All of them, yes.
Yes, all of them. And each year people should account and just bring it to the table. But please don't have 3 financial years and audited. And anyway, the duty of trust should be upheld, and not only should it be working, but be seen to work.
Thank you.
But there's no substitute to good corporate governance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how the world is moving.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biraro. Hopefully next year there'll be an improvement in what your report puts forward. There'll be less of this recurring issues that we see, and really, we are not a country that can afford government wasteful expenditure.
I think it will not happen unless government takes his recommendations
seriously. Let's see what other coordinating institutions can do to really make this something once and for all, deliberately focused on, not only by government, but even other institutions. So I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Obadiah, Auditor General, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come here and share with us, key salient elements of the report. Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank Charles Haber, Brenna Namata, as always, Resident Square panelist. I'd like to thank our viewers for also sharing with us their thoughts. We didn't have enough time to go through the amount of tweets coming in, but please keep the conversation going. We'll definitely engage even after the show. To our viewers, thank you very much. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for supporting the Square. Have a good night. See you again next week.